Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. This show is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, a London-based company where we help teams and organizations transition to an office-optional approach. To have a look at what we do and the show notes to our podcast episodes, head over to virtualnotdistant.com. Thank you for spending your time with us. Hello and welcome to episode 209 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Welcome, I'm Pilar, your host, and I will be hosting the show on my own today, but I have plenty of other voices, plenty of other guests to join us. We're going to be looking at the journey of the remote leader, and I thought it'd be interesting to hear from people how they've learned on the job mainly to lead a distributed team or even an organization, and sometimes how they've just learned to be a manager. Full stop. So the guests today, none of them are trained managers, none of them had lots of experience leading teams. They found themselves for various reasons leading a team and they were distributed, or they, in the case of one of our guests, they were the only person who was mainly remote. So very different experiences from all of them, some commonalities, a lot of self-awareness. This is something that I think is the first point where we need to look at when we're looking at leadership practice, is that self-awareness. And one could even argue that it goes double for when we are away from our team members for a lot of reasons. So today we've got Marcus Wermuth, who has been on the show a few times, and he will be back. We've got Laïla von Alvensleben from Mural, and also Millie Blackwell, who's a co-founder of Showcase Workshop, and Tim Burgess, who you have heard from before, who is a founder of Shield GEO. And I spoke to all of them. I've got the interviews stuck away, and I will be releasing them at some point as full interviews. But for now, we'll hear different bits from them. Before we do that, just virtualnotdistant.com is the place where we live, where Virtual Not Distant lives, and at Pilar is where you can find me on Twitter. But before all of that, let's have a short section to see what's going on.
What's going on?
What's going on? What's going on? Well, something that I want to bring your attention to is a whole series of articles on online meetings, on remote meetings. And this is an article, a series that's been curated by Judy Rees, who some of you might know. And there's a collection of us have contributed to it. And I have to say, everyone on that series has been on this show. So Nancy Settle-Murphy, who looks mainly at cultural and global teams. We've got Lisette Sutherland, who, of course, used to co-host, author of Work From Anywhere. We have Elise Keith from Lucid Meetings, that software, which is actually designed for mainly co-located meetings, but a lot of what they talk about is, of course, applicable. Mark Kilby, who's been on the show a number of times. And there's also Judy Rees has an article. And myself, my article is about the social connection. That is the one thing I have to say about online meetings. The reason why I think they should still play a part in teamwork is because they enable, of course, richer communication because it's real time, but also the social connection. We bring the whole of ourselves to it rather than just a little bit of text and our professional take on things. So having said that, I'm also thinking that we need to reduce the time that we allocate to meetings for collaboration. As in, a lot of other stuff can happen in between meetings. And if we apply the principles of visible teamwork, then we can make the meeting super efficient, but also make sure that we're still collaborating throughout the process, not just in meetings. We have an online course that will be released at some point on leading through visible teamwork. However, going back to meetings, this is an article that's just happened, and Judy will be on the show at some point talking about the event that followed that. So it's an interesting project to be involved with. So thanks, Judy, and thanks InfoQ for involving me. Another article I'd like to bring to your attention, and it's, to be honest, it's one that I hadn't quite come across. But after the event on mental health and remote working, somebody from Minds at Work actually contacted me and said, Pilar, where can I find examples of good learning and development being done in a distributed way? And I said, ooh, that's interesting. And interesting is a word I use often when I'm not sure what to say, as Bart, listener, has pointed out. But it was a good question because it brings up the question of what is learning. What do we mean by learning? A lot of the time we're referring to formal education. Sometimes it's about gathering information. So if we look at formal learning, I sent the person who contacted me to Buffer because Buffer shares a lot of what they do. One of our guest today is from there. He's sharing all his learning, and we are seeing how the enabling is being enabled in all sorts of ways. So this is an article about how Buffer managed that as an organization, and it's interesting from a number of ways. So the title is Our Growth Mindset Fund gives every teammate $800 a year. Here's how and why. Already the fact that it's being called a growth mindset rather than a learning or training budget already says a lot, and it reminds us that how we talk about what we do really matters. This, of course, applies to the whole of the world of work. I really like that they have reasons why they found that even though they had a budget of $20,000 per year, they'd only used $5,000 of it. So something was going on. As they say in the article, this perk wasn't connecting with teammates. So they looked at it, at what the reasons were, and they forgot about it. So again, just a reminder, constant reminder of if we want people to action something, to completely remind them, to continuously remind them. They didn't feel it was enough money to do something worthwhile. They didn't feel they had the time or capacity to do more learning outside of work. So this is a fund that is for not on-the-job learning, and it's not a fund for the informal learning that we could curate. It's more for I'm going to take some time to just focus on my growth. So like career coaching, courses, certifications, subscriptions, elective conferences, because they say that any conference required for a teammate's work is already fully covered. So this is really about developing yourself as a person beyond what we're already doing. So I'm going to leave you to read the article. It's very short, and I think it's a great example. There might be some ideas here you can take. And if not, it's just interesting to see how this is being managed in a distributed company. Then one tech, it's not even a piece of news, really, this tech thing. It's something that I've discovered. So in the, again, remote event I attended on mental health, I came in the middle, I joined a table in the middle of a discussion about how we could have breakout rooms in something like Microsoft Teams. So just to give us a little bit of context, in meetings, going back to meetings, but also especially in workshops, Zoom, the application Zoom, has become very popular because it's got a feature which are the breakout rooms. And this is the reason why that's my preferred tool of choice, and I was introduced to it by Judy Rees. So you can actually go off and work in smaller groups if you're working in Zoom, and then come back together as a plenary. So that is a very interesting feature. It's a very important feature, actually. And I was working with someone recently who was working with a client, and they had customers based in China, employees based in China. And she found out that Zoom doesn't work there. Her workshop is designed around breakout rooms because she wants participants to have nice, deep conversations, and that is better done in smaller groups. So she's got to think a group of about 20 people, and they need to have conversations. So, Zoom doesn't work in China. Where else? What else can we do? And this organization, like many large enterprises, has Microsoft Office as the ecosystem. And within that, there's Microsoft Teams. Now, Chris Lemp, who was at this other event, was suggesting one way of doing this would be to set different channels in Microsoft Teams, which works very much like Slack. It's like a big chat room, which I think can be used for asynchronous, and it's better used for asynchronous. But anyway, that's a different story. So we can create different channels, and within each channel, we can have a meeting. We can have a place where we can join a different kind of meeting. So that might be one way. And I'm sharing this with you because you might be stuck in that ecosystem and need to have something a little bit different. So, for example, you might have a team meeting with a team of 15 people, and you can break out, just create different channels, maybe on the fly or before that, and join them as you will, and then come back to meet in one channel. So you can very easily set up a join a meeting in each channel, and then you can all come back to the main one. Fiddly. So all it means is that these kind of things where we're using tools when we're trying to get them to do something that they're not quite ready to do yet, or that they weren't designed to do, we need a bit more preparation. So on Zoom, you can just breakout rooms. If you use something like this, slightly different. I've heard people using, when they used to use Skype for Business, set up different meetings and have different URLs. That would be another way of doing it. So there we go. So for internal stuff, maybe that's something I'd like to share with you. So because I'm going to be guiding you through the big chunky main part of the show, I've got two more things I'd like to say, and that's actually hello to some listeners. So Bart, hello. I did speak to Bart about he did tell me some of his thoughts about the show in real time. We connect every now and then. And he sent me a note over and he said, I love that you were at Maya's home office to record it. And this is regarding episode 208 about working from home and staying healthy. So he said, I love that you were at Maya's home office to record it. Gave it a very personal and natural flavor. It's also a good way to start talking about the health aspect. So thank you very much. And I have to say that in a previous conversation with Bart, who's based in Belgium, he suggested a really great topic to look at, which is how is remote work evolving in different parts of the world. So I might not go as far as the world, but definitely Europe. I think we've got enough people who can come on the show and tell us from a local perspective how it's going. So listeners, if you're based somewhere that is not the UK, or if you're based in the UK as well, then send your thoughts in with what you think is going on, how it's being adopted, what aspects of the geographical culture are hindering that adoption or enabling it. I would love to hear from you. So virtualnotdistant.com for the long contact form answers. If you want to email me, Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com. If you want to send a quick audio, you're very welcome. Or you can tweet also at Pilar or T. I have one more hello to say to a listener called Maria, Maria M. I don't want to say your surname, Maria, because I haven't asked you for permission. You've connected with me on LinkedIn. You told me you listened to the show and that you've made it your job. I would even say your mission, because sometimes it does feel like a mission to enable more flexible working, which includes remote working from your organization. So kudos, lovely to hear from you. If there's anything that, of course, I've already said this to you. If I can help in any way, let me know. But listeners, if you are listening to the show and connect on LinkedIn, do let me know that you are connecting because you listen to the show. All right, we've got a newsletter that you can sign up to. It's a monthly recommended reading and listening over at virtualnotdistant.com, and there you can see everything else we do. But for now, let's move on to this guest-packed segment. Today's episode is all about the experience of leading a remote team for the first time and how thoughtful people leaders are learning through their experience. And once more, as I've been putting this episode together, I've been struck by the diversity in approach. There really is not one way of doing things. We start with the individual, how it suits us, how it suits our team, how it suits our organization. But there are some commonalities, and those are the things that I would like to share with you. Some of these are around giving feedback. There is also quite some stuff about lessons learned along the way, and even about the awareness that actually being away from the team brings to us. And then we'll see what we like best. I also learned some stuff about how teams can gain visibility within the organization. So I'll just give you a heads up on the people who I talked to for this episode. I talked to Laïla von Alvensleben from Mural, Marcus Wermuth from Buffer, Tim Burgess from Shield GEO, and Millie Blackwell from Showcase Workshop. And you will have come across both Marcus and Tim in earlier episodes from this show. So let's start with a new voice to the podcast. I met Laïla at a meetup in London, and I was really taken in by the honesty in her talk when she shared her first steps in leading a remote team. And Laïla is the head of people operations at Mural, which is a visual collaboration tool. If you like to brainstorm online, if you like to plan online, if you like to use visual tools, then do check it out. And she joined the company over a year ago as part of the customer success team. But for the last 6 months, she's been the head of people operations. And this involves, well, basically making sure that people are having a great experience at the company. The company has 2 hubs, one in San Francisco and one in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and they have various remote workers in the US and Europe. So I'm going to throw you listeners in at the deep end, just like Laïla was thrown into the deep end, not having managed a remote team before and actually having to create a new team from scratch, the people operations team, when actually her background was in design.
I'm currently in London. Sometimes I move around a bit, so I tend to be quite nomadic. But then we have somebody in San Francisco at the office there, but she often works from home. And we also have someone in Buenos Aires office, and she's usually in the office, but sometimes she's working from home as well. And then we have a recruiter in Buenos Aires as well, who's between Mar del Plata, which is another town, and Buenos Aires. So she goes back and forth. And we're actually hiring somebody who's starting next week who will be based in Brighton. I did not have experience leading teams. I had always worked in a team, and then I had freelanced a bit, but I had never been in a manager role before. So this was definitely my first time. And there were many, many things, and there still are many, many things that I'm learning along the way. But I didn't even, have time really to pick up a book about management and just kind of read. So when I have time, I've spoken to a lot of people who have given me a lot of useful advice on how to manage teams. And I use also my own experience from previous managers I've had and who have inspired me to lead my teams and a bit of common sense. But there's obviously some training that I would like to get, actually. People operations, as you can imagine, is that it deals with people. And we have to make sure that we're available to anyone who wants to contact us. And of course, they can reach us on Slack and we can have calls with them. But I think the main challenge that we had was, first of all, that the people operations team did not exist prior to what we have now. So it really had to be built from scratch. And the other challenge we had, we did have one person working in HR/recruiting in Buenos Aires, but she had just started in December, and she was also doing office management, actually. So she was doing like 3 roles in one. But aside from that, there was no team. And myself and the other person who's part of and who started the team, The other person was the executive assistant to the CEO. And then there was me, who has an experience in design, a background in design. So it was interesting because the majority of us have never worked in people operations or HR. So it's kind of a learning by doing process where we're just trying to teach ourselves a lot on what people operations actually is.
So that is quite a range of challenges for first-time manager Laïla. Let's now hear from our second guest, Marcus Wermuth from Buffer. Regular listeners will have already heard plenty about him and from him. So let's hear how he got started as a manager in a fully distributed company. And straight after him, we'll hear back from Laïla sharing a very similar thought to Marcus.
I was an engineer. I worked as a freelancer when I started out, joined different startups here and there here in Europe, and then worked with agencies, kind of very different teams, and then joined Buffer also as an engineer. And then for, I think, the first 1.5 years, I worked as an engineer at Buffer and then fell into this.
So, and you said that I think that's quite important, that your professional life had been remote.
Yeah.
Was there anything in the remote environment, though, that you struggled at the beginning, especially as a manager? Because we all know that we might be used to working remotely, but you mentioned you work with so many different kind of organizations and clients. Was there anything about how they worked at Buffer that you found a little bit more difficult to adjust to?
I have to say that as an engineer, when I joined, nothing really surprised me. Like I grown up in tech, let's say professionally. So even if there was a different tool I wasn't used to, it wasn't that big of a challenge for me, which was a blessing in that moment because I was able to adapt pretty quickly. As a manager, there's of course a couple of struggles, but I wouldn't say they are highly related to Buffer or maybe necessarily remote work, at least in the beginning. Of course, I think there's the challenge almost everyone who switches into management happens to have is, I call it the productivity challenge, where I struggled for at least a couple of months in the beginning when I changed my job with feeling productive. You know, as an engineer, you write code and you can write one line and you can see the change, the result immediately, right? You can make a button show up, or you can make a button do something and you can test it and you see it immediately. And at the end of the day, you see a whole lot of things you did. But as a manager, that kind of totally threw me off because it wasn't the same. Everything you do and the result you want to see, it takes weeks, months until you actually see the outcome of your work. So that was a very big thing for me, you know, like a day full of video calls at the end. I said, oh God, what did I do today? Nothing. But actually, as a manager, you did do work, right? So understanding that was a big challenge for me at the beginning. You can map it to Buffer and remote work because, of course, I didn't start as a manager. I started as an engineer and switched. So that was definitely a challenge. And on top of that, being remote, not seeing others, how they do, and just being alone in my room and having to cope with my thoughts here, that, of course, was a challenge.
Then or now, do you still have any engineer tasks, or are you fully just looking after the team?
I'm of the part that engineering managers shouldn't code. Well, they should know what's going on and chat with engineers and be able to understand that. But doing two things while I did that, I was coding and managing the team a little bit. At the beginning, I really struggled because you can't do two things very well, right? So I'm of the opinion that you should just focus on one thing and, you know, enable your team to really do their best work and not mix your code in there.
I like sometimes learning new things, but sometimes I do miss the more creative side of my work. That I used to be able to have more time to create content, and now I'm realizing that managing a team is a lot about, it's about managing, right? It's not about creating. Sometimes I feel like, what am I actually doing? You know, because my calendar is so packed with meetings and here and there, and okay, now I have to arrange this and I have to set up that. But sometimes the content creation is what I miss the most. But I do like learning a lot as well.
And Marcus and Laïla are perfect examples of how people learn along the way, seeking support, which we'll hear even more about a bit later, obtaining feedback, which you'll also hear about a bit later, and of course learning loads of lessons along the way. And sometimes the lesson that as a leader of a team or even of a distributed company, the lessons we learn there are slightly different to those we would be learning in the co-located space. So at this point, I would like to bring in for the second time on the show, I'm sure it won't be the last, Tim Burgess, co-founder of Shield GEO. And that company, they help other companies employ and payroll their international employees where the company is unable to do so. So let's see what he's taking from his experience of leading people and from being in a position to role model.
I always worked in very small companies for the most part. Even I guess the last job I had before starting Shield was about 40 people in the state that I was in. But so I wasn't prepared for leadership, I wouldn't say, and so that's been a real test for me personally, but a very rewarding one. There's a guy, Jerry Colonna. Are you familiar with this guy? So he's a leadership coach. He has a podcast called Reboot, a company called Reboot, and in fact, a book also called Reboot. The philosophy that he subscribes to is that work can be an opportunity for self growth, for self fulfillment, and it can be an opportunity to grow into a better person. And that those two things go hand in hand, becoming a better person and particularly being a better leader. If you talk about my personal journey, that's a philosophy that resonates very strongly with me because I feel like I've been tested in ways and I've been required to grow in ways that have been very helpful to me, even though they've been difficult, if that makes sense. One of our staff members once told me that she read a comment, I think it was on Chatter in Salesforce. We use Salesforce to administer the business, and she read this thing and she was so upset. She went and got her daughter. Her daughter is a teenager, and said, "Hey, can you come and have a look at this? Am I reading this wrong? Is this as rude as I think it is?" And that just destroyed me. I'm pretty sure it was one of my comments. She never directly told me that it was one of my comments, but in my mind, it definitely was. And the idea that just these words were going to ruin her day, and also that if you picture her, she's at home. If her daughter isn't there, as it happened, daughter had come home from school, so she could talk to her. But if her daughter's not there, she's sitting in a room in her house, stewing on this thing, and unable to get any context or interpretation around it. And so once we started to uncover that we had these problems within our communication style, and I was a big part of it, not the only one, but it like I certainly enabled it and was a big participant. Then we've tried to work quite hard to be more empathetic and to be more balanced and to try and build stronger bonds within people so that we have that context.
Now, something I was curious to find out was the kind of things that managers did and do to find out how their team members are doing when they are far, far away, and also how these managers have helped to evolve these practices. So let's go back to Marcus and the kind of team meetings he holds with his team. And his team builds the mobile apps for the iOS and Android platforms for Buffer, the social media scheduling tool. And Marcus's job is to lead the managers and help them along in their day.
I think at the beginning, I was obviously more focused on, I have to know what's going on. I have to be in contact all the time, right? That was kind of a worry. I don't want to say worry, but that was the beginning. And once you, I think, start to grow with the team and build those relationships, right, the psychological safety around them, I start to get removed more from day-to-day work. Like I don't check in with every engineer every day to see every little task they do. I don't want to be, a micromanager. Micromanaging remotely is very, very hard. You would have to be up for 24/7. So, of course, we have the one-on-ones. Those are, very standard every week with everyone in my team. And then there is a mobile team call that's also every week. That changed throughout the years. That meeting definitely went through some changes. At the beginning, it was more like a status update. Like, oh, I did this. Oh, I did this. Oh, I did this. And sometimes someone was going on for like 5 minutes and you fell asleep. And you noticed like, that's not the best use of our time, right? We shouldn't stay here in this meeting and just give a status update. And then at the end, the last 10 minutes where we wanted to discuss, they were always the most interesting, but we never got to it almost. So we changed it. I don't know exactly. There's one part I'm missing, but we went then to totally asynchronous meetings because our team for a couple of months was split between Taiwan and San Francisco. So we weren't able to get everyone on one call. So we totally went asynchronous. We used a tool called Carrot, and then now with Buffer Threads, where we did asynchronous updates, and then worked well. We did the status updates. You can catch up on them asynchronously, and you can start other, threads or posts about discussing different, more important topics. And what we're doing right now is kind of a mix between that. We do status updates kind of on the side. There's a reminder in Slack and some documents where every week they fill in what they did for each platform. So I'm not interested in each person, but what iOS and Android got done. Because then I'm also responsible to report that back to our stakeholders for different product teams, right? They want to know what happened in their mobile apps. So that's what we do for like all the status updates. And then in our Thursday call, we get together. We have either 1, 2, or 3, but focus on like one big question we want to discuss about, and then use those 35, 40 minutes to just chat about this. How can we collaborate better with other teams? Or how can we use Jira better? Like different things which you can mostly only do in like a synchronous call. And that's what we do on Thursdays.
How do you decide what the question you will tackle on that Thursday is?
It's either a theme we're noticing. Maybe someone brought something up and I say, oh, that's a good question. Or I give the responsibility to someone in my team to come up with it. We kind of switch every week a little bit. Sometimes there's like 3 things about the current project we're working on. We have to discuss how we integrate with it. Then the other week, it's like no one has an idea. So I come up with a topic which is more team or collaboration focused. So it varies. I think we just go with the flow there a little bit.
And I think you were going to carry on onto something else before I interrupted you.
Yeah, there's just something we used and I'm trying to get it back. And it was a tool called Office Vibe. The name, I think, doesn't matter. But I want something like that back where it gave me a pulse into how my team is feeling throughout the week without chatting to them. So every week they would have to fill out a very quick survey, very easy, fun. You could sprinkle in some custom questions as a manager, but they were general, And that kind of gave me a pulse in the week, whereas, wellness is down to 4, it's red, or relationship with manager is at 6, so I have to do a better job there. They're not obviously the whole truth, but they gave you kind of a sign of like, wellness is down, motivation is down. I had different metrics in there, and I really, really loved that because it gave me kind of a feeling of certain focus areas of myself. On a broader scale, we do reviews. We are currently in a 360 review time where everyone is doing them, but they of course don't happen every week, and we don't want to do them every week, right? So that tool, that Pulse thing, I always call it Pulse, that was really, really powerful for me, and I'm trying to get something like that back.
And how did that work? Was it everyone filled it in on the same day of the week? Was it anonymous? How many questions? How long do you think it took?
Yeah, it was anonymous. It took you less than 5 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. It was really a nice website. You clicked on a link in Zoom and you dragged the slider through the different questions. It was very easy to do. And I think, people did it randomly. I think you could set up a different day and time, or at least time. But that didn't matter. It's not about, it was a continuous dashboard. It's not that only when everyone filled it in, you see it. It was a continuous thing, right? That was the important part. So that really helped me. Something, now that I remember, we do in most of the buffer meetings, not just in my team, we do ample lights when we kick off the meeting. So we go around, everyone says, today I'm feeling light green, yellowish because that happened. Today I feel green, like everything is going well. Or I feel really red, like, wow, everything is going crazy here. So I don't want to say it's a replacement because that always happens just in meetings, but that helps a bit too.
And how often did you used to check that pulse?
At least once or twice a week. Because in there, people could also give comments if they wanted to, and you could check on those.
It would be so addictive to me.
Yeah.
And so you would look at it, and then would you then pick anything from there that you wanted to then bring to the team to talk about together? Or did you use it just for your reflection? And also, did other team members also check it?
Team members didn't have access to that. That was one thing I didn't like that much. I checked it a lot, and I don't know. I don't think I used everything for the team all the time. It was first and foremost reflection, because it also compared, I think, to the whole company. So you get a sense of how is my team doing? And then also, well, if there was something like, let's say, collaboration was like down to 2 from 1 to 10, I would, of course, bring that up. So if something was down, I would say to them, hey, listen, been noticing there's like a downward trend. What's going on? And you also had a number, I think it was from 1 to 10. So you get a feeling of like, you're doing great, you're at 8, and it gave you descriptions of how you're performing or how that reflects in general. So I don't know how much of that is very, very, very useful, but it was useful in the moment because it gives you kind of a gut check, right? You're alone. You don't have someone to talk to all the time. Your manager you see maybe once a week. So that kind of gave you a quick gut check. If your team, of course, is honest and responding in it like in an honest way.
I suppose it's the substitute. If we take our mind back to the co-located space, it's just, and you said gut feeling is the substitute of the atmosphere in the office, I imagine.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of the feeling. If you're in a room and you see someone with a frowning face, someone is smiling, you kind of get a feeling of, oh, okay, something might be up, or if they're not collaborating, you see them work together or not. I think, yeah, that's what you don't have. Look into the office, right?
And listeners, if Marcus' mention of asynchronous meetings is of interest to you, check out episode 195, where he speaks about it at length. Now, meetings, online meetings, especially when they're carried out for syncing or regular updates, can be tricky for teams which have team members spread over different time zones where there's quite a gap in the day for them. So let's hear from our fourth guest today. First time on the show. Her name is Millie Blackwell, and she is the founder of Showcase Workshop, and I'll let her tell you what her company does.
Showcase Workshop itself is a presentation app, and mostly for medium and large companies. And the one line, the elevator pitch that we like to use is that it allows our customers to enhance, distribute, and track their sales presentations. We are a team of 12, and with the exception of one person who is long-term but temporarily based in Germany, we are otherwise all spread across New Zealand and the USA. One of the things that actually worked well for us in the early days and continues to work quite well is something that the New Zealand team came up with, because they are technically, according to the calendar, they are a day ahead of everybody based in the US, and so their Monday is the Sunday here in the US. So they suggested that we move our work week, or the period that we report our progress on, instead of it being Monday to Friday their time and then Monday to Friday for our time in the US, they suggested that they move their work week to be Tuesday to Monday. On their Tuesday, that's Monday in the US, we can all have a call together, and we're all talking about, we're reflecting on the week that's been, that everybody basically ended at the same time, and we're all starting a fresh week and talking about our objectives and our goals for the week that we're all starting together. And that was a way that we could all get on the camera at the same time and all be kind of on the same page.
Now, something that is still a common trait amongst people who like to work remotely, whether we're talking freelancers or people working in organizations far away from their collaborators, something in common is the fact that you need to be quite resilient. We are still dependent on technology, and technology is still far from perfect. And it's going to affect our work, and it's going to even affect our relationships. Think of what a poor internet connection can do to a conversation, and therefore to your relationship with the person you're having that conversation with. And something I'm noticing with managers, apart from this resilience around technology, is that the people who are enjoying the space have become comfortable with the idea of experimenting and are willing to ask their team members to experiment. This is quite a new space. We don't have it sorted. What works in one company doesn't work in another. What works with one kind of communication doesn't work with another one. So we've already heard a couple of great examples of experimentation. And I'd now like to share with you how Laïla transferred a method of team feedback, which was actually designed to be done in the space together, how she transferred it to the online space and what she found out. And you can actually find out in detail about the process through one of her blog posts, which we'll link to in the show notes, because she came across this method in her studies, actually, and also when she worked for a previous company, a company called Hanu.
The feedback model I'm using is actually, it's not anything that, that Hanu invented or that I invented. I actually studied at Hyper Island, which is a great school that originated in Sweden. But I did the school in the UK, and during this master's class, basically we learned various feedback models that we would do in person, and then I just took that feedback model and adapted it to an online version that could be done using Zoom and using Mural, so that we all have something visual to look at. Because the model itself was about writing very short feedback on sticky notes, and then taking some time to think about, okay, for example, what is one thing that I appreciate about you, and what is one thing that you could do better, or you could use a start, continue, stop model. And then since Mural is all about, digitalizing sticky notes, for example, and having that space to express ourselves and to have everybody also engage in the same space, virtual space, I created a template in Mural that could be used with teams of any size, I would say, but I think, better if the team is between at least 3 people up to maybe 8. And so this template, basically, it does require a lot of trust and transparency in the team, because when you're doing this in a physical space, you're writing on your sticky notes in private, and nobody can see what you're writing while you're writing them. Whereas in Mural, if you're writing, technically anybody can come and look over on the online whiteboard and see what you're writing about them. And that kind of created some issues, and I've tried to do some workarounds where I said, okay, you can write your feedback somewhere else, like on another Mural, the private one, or a document, or just write it somewhere, and then you copy paste it in this template when you're ready to share the feedback openly. But I think it's more successful when people just, okay, we're all going to give feedback to each other anyway. Whether people see us writing the feedback or not shouldn't change the whole process, and let's not overcomplicate it. So the idea is you write pieces of feedback for everybody on the team, and then you share them, you read them out openly with everybody listening, and you go individually one by one through each team member. So we'll maybe pick one team member to start, and then everybody will read their feedback to that person, put it in the Mural. We have that person has a designated area where they receive their virtual sticky notes. And then those are kept in the Mural, and anybody can come back to that Mural at any point to look back at their feedback.
I suppose with preparation also, for those of us who need more time to think about things, you're going to have the meeting, so you can prepare, and then it's a question of just finding the right words at the moment.
Yes.
And I really like that distinction you've made between, sometimes we're writing in private until we're ready to show and share, but there can be times. But I suppose you can get used to that, I imagine. I
think it's very interesting what you say, because it's something that we've experienced in different kinds of workshops that I was facilitating before with some of the clients that Mural has, and people openly, admitting that they felt very uncomfortable having to be creative or write their ideas in a space that everybody could share them before the idea was, perfect or ready to be shared. And I think what Mural does is actually does change behaviors and mindsets in so many ways. It's not just about becoming accustomed to working and collaborating online, but it's also changing your perception of, okay, what does it mean to collaborate in a truly open and transparent fashion? You can see the creative process as it's being done in real time.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a friend of mine because I am an advocate of visible teamwork. So whatever we're working on, if it can be done in the cloud, just do it there, and anyone can pop in anytime. But my friend was was saying, yeah, well, maybe in the team, maybe, but if it's for another part of the organization, I don't want people to see stuff that's not quite ready, and it's almost like exposing your guts as you're working on something, and not knowing how people are going to react, whether you're going to be judged on that. So. Yeah, I really like that distinction you were making. So that's at a team level. But how do managers working far away from their team members know how everyone is doing individually? Well, sometimes technology, the environment that shapes team communication, has the key.
So I used to work previously at a company called Hano. It's a digital product design team, and they were fully remote, or let's say fully distributed, to use that less heavily loaded word. And at Hano, I think we created a lot of good habits around checking in with each other and asking how we were doing. And we actually had created a bot. This was before. There's tons of bots like this now, but this was maybe it was 4 years ago. We had created a bot that would ask us on Slack how we were doing on a scale of 1 to 5. And then we would share that, and it would be posted in the general channel where everybody could read. And we realized through a series of experiments that if it was somebody in our team who would ask somebody else how you're feeling, there was a higher chance that we would not lie about how we're feeling, but just not be fully truthful and would just say, yes, we're fine. Kind of like the typical, how are you? I'm fine situation. And when it was the bot who would ask the question, people would often be more honest, and they would say, okay, I'm not feeling so great. Maybe because it was, I don't know, there's a lot of things psychologically that we could look into. But basically, this was a great habit, and it allowed us to have an overview of how everyone is feeling. So I've taken that ritual from my previous team into this one. And so I set up a bot that it's called GeekBot. It asks these questions that are used, like the stand-up questions. What did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Do you have any blockers? But the first question before that I added was, how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 5, and why? I already get an idea there. My team tends to be pretty honest, I believe. And then I also have weekly one-on-ones with everyone on the team. And during those calls, we also talk about how they're doing on a more personal level.
Do you pick up things that are shared with the bot that then you follow up, or you pretty much just leave it as is and just keep an eye out?
No, sometimes I follow up, and I usually will react to their check-ins if I can, even if it's just a small emoji to kind of acknowledge that, yes, I've read your check-in. So if it's a positive check-in and they've mentioned that, they're happy and the weather is great and spring is coming, I can put just little flower emojis and sun emojis. But if it's something a bit more serious, for example, one person on our team is pregnant and sometimes she doesn't feel physically very well, I'll make sure that I send out a direct message to her, a private one, just to see how she's doing and make sure that if she needs to take the day off, then she can take it off.
And remind me, is this a daily thing that happens?
The bot is a daily, and it appears at 10 a.m. in everybody's local time. So it's an automated question on Slack.
We already use emojis a lot, but using emojis in Slack too, because we have a mobile channel and not a separate iOS and Android channel. So I thought, and I got this from another company, to just differentiate certain messages so that when you look at it, you immediately can see, oh, this doesn't relate me, or this is related to me. So kind of thinking about smaller things and also broader things. So I think everything around communication is worth experimenting with because all of this work is still so new.
Emojis. Who would have guessed that we end up talking about the role of emojis in leading teams? So this last point that Marcus was making about using emojis not to show a smiley face, and by the way, I was dictating this into a Google Doc, and when I said a smiley face, it actually came up with an emoji. So we use them to show mood, to show our reactions to messages, or thumbs up when we agree or with something, or to signal that we've seen a message. But to look for more clarity on a collaboration platform using emojis is something that I've also been experimenting with. Not as much in my own team. We are a small team, so our Slack, which is what we use, tends to be quite clean. So our asynchronous space for text-based communication is quite clean, but in the community virtual team talk. So it's very simple by using emojis within the message. For me, it's not about illustrating. I see this a lot in social media. Personally, I don't like the use of emojis in text. But some people like it, and it gives the text some life, so that's nice. But it's not about illustrating the message. It's actually about signposting. So, for example, we can signal that a message is important without adding the channel. In small teams, it's not a problem, but for example, in communities or in organization-wide teams where you might have a couple hundred people, you might not want to alert everyone to it, but you might want to signal its importance. So sometimes you can put, an asterisk, a sun, a big eye next to it, which says you must look at this. And, or for example, if it's something about reading, you can put a little book emoji, etc. So a couple of things with that is be mindful, and also if you can agree, if it's a small team, if you can agree what some of these might mean, then that's a shortcut. So it is a way of helping the communication be more efficient, less overwhelming, and easier to navigate. Right, so emoji tangent aside, I never thought I'd end up talking so much about them. But actually, maybe we could have a whole episode about that. Let's go back to how team leaders catch up with individuals this time, one-on-one. And in essence, this is no different to the kind of catch-ups you might expect managers and their team members to have in the co-located space. But there are some differences in how we prepare for them and why we have them. So let's hear first what Millie has to say, and then we'll come back to Laïla.
One of the things that I introduced was just that this is a fairly basic concept, but spending an hour with everybody individually once a month. For a good portion of those are video conferences, or if we can get together, then we do. But just having that, establishing that one-on-one contact and trying to engineer in the conversations and the things that you would otherwise learn from being together in an office, especially about clients, just overhearing different conversations, or the fact that you can quickly ask someone over a desk, trying to engineer that in with the one-on-one conversations, keeping them light. They're not like a monthly review. They're just a chance to have those conversations about what's going on.
I was used to doing one-on-ones in the past before. I always try to make sure that there's enough time to, just have a nice conversation that doesn't have to jump straight into work. And we can talk about how they're doing. If somebody's working in the office, I ask them, like, how are things going on at the office? Because I'm not there and I don't know what's happening behind the scenes there. But I now started to write notes for myself, because in the beginning I would just let it be a kind of informal chat, like imagining that I was taking them out for a coffee, right? Mm-hmm. But now, just for my sake, I do try to take notes before of things that I would like to bring up with them. And so it's a little bit more structured on my side, but I don't necessarily share this agenda with them before. It's kind of an informal agenda for myself.
Yeah, it's you're getting your brain ready rather than creating an agenda for the meeting. Yeah, nice.
Right, and it's of course it's important to have spontaneous conversations, and although this isn't fully spontaneous, because it's actually, I feel like in distributed teams you have to force that spontaneity a little bit to make it seem natural. I also think that when you have so many things to do and you're in a startup that is moving really fast, and you just want to make sure that you don't lose that opportunity that you have, when you could have asked a question around a topic that would have been relevant, and especially with the time zone differences. And if I forget, all of a sudden it might be too late for me or too late for the other person until the next day.
Getting to know the human behind, just the work part and building those relationships, and then helping those people grow in a very authentic way. I think that's probably what I like most about it. with remote work, I think a lot of things become more intentional about work. We don't have all the office politics, right? They're all out of the way. So it's all about concentrating on what's important, the outcome of your team, the work, but also the human relationship. That's the only thing you have, right? Communication in remote teams. So I think that's the aspect I love the most.
And what kind of things are a part of that? So how do you get to know people? Just some of the things that you do, you probably don't even think about them anymore. How do you get to know your team members better and other people?
There's the obvious thing, meeting with them in real life, right? Our retreats, getting together as a remote team, you can't replace that. That's still very valuable. And 2 past years when we did a big retreat, but also a team retreat where I just met with my team, I think those were very big bonding moments I had with them. Staying in one Airbnb, cooking together, playing mini golf, doing just fun things. I think that was really, really, really a good time to bond with the team. But then also day in, day out, just a normal thing. And I'm not sure if all managers do that. And there's a lot of articles where people write, do this. But just starting your one-on-one and chatting about not the weather, but this one person likes video games, chat with them about video games, what interests them, what happened. As one person on my team has 3 kids, I always ask him, like, how crazy has your past week been with 3 kids at home? Start to getting to know them more in their private and personal life to also understand where they want to go, not just keeping the one-on-one as like a status report or chatting about only work, right? So I think that's a very small thing you can do, and it's very easy, but that already helps you to get to know the person on a more personal level.
And how do you support your team members' development? Yes, what are some of the things you do, or what are some of the things that you think about when you're thinking, okay, I have these people, and I want, like you said, where they want to go, maybe even professionally. How do you support them?
Well, in all the ways possible. We have a career framework, as I mentioned. So for all the engineers, I don't want to say easy, but that helps a lot with that, So someone wants to become a senior engineer, we have exactly the different columns and things they should be able to do. Of course, abstracted in a way, but we can bring that in and discuss how that looks for their special team. So that's something we chat about at least once a quarter, having kind of a career growth check. We have a certain document where we document all those things and work on, and then we have even step promotions in there. So you can grow from engineer 3 to senior engineer 1, but you can also grow from engineer 3, step 1 to step 2 to step 3, step 4, and then you make the final jump. So there's all small little promotions helping them along the way. So maybe they did something very extraordinary and are operating in this one column already as like the next level. So we give them kind of a step promotion, right? And then there's also, we had this one question I think someone asked at the retreat, and I did that with my team too. It sounds very funny and people react weird to it when you ask them, but once they think about it, it's a really cool question. We said, what's the best job at Buffer for you and what's the worst job at Buffer for you? Not thinking about, oh my God, this poor person, maybe that person loves their job, but what would be for you the worst and best job at Buffer? And it is some cool reflection on how they think and if they're on the right role, if there's other aspects. So if, for example, one engineer said, the CTO is the best role, I really love that. And he's already a very architecture-driven person and thinks about strategy a lot. So I said, that's great. That fits you very well. What is there that we can bring in from the CTO role into your current role right now? So you kind of, create motivation around that, because of course, we can't have 2 CTOs at the same time, and you still want to keep that person. So how can we make his life or her life better in that sense? So I think those are all small little things I can think of right now.
Let's pick up on Marcus' last point about helping individuals grow within the organization. We can't do this in isolation, and we can't do this if our team or our team members or the work we're doing doesn't have visibility in the organization. So let's come back to Marcus to look at that aspect of team leadership in organizations that is often overlooked, which is advocating for the team and giving the team visibility. Sometimes you could argue I've seen the penny drop in a manager's brain during a workshop where we talk about this, when they go, actually, that's what I need to be focusing on. My team know what they're doing. We're working quite well as a remote team or as a virtual team even. However, I need to put more focus in us being visible in the organization. That's what's really going to help us. So this is not very often talked about, although we now are starting to realize how important it is, especially when our team is the only one remote or when we still have many other colleagues working in the office. So let's have a listen to Marcus as he explains how he supports his team members, and then we'll segue with him into the wider theme of visibility. And once that's happened, Laïla will tell us how her team of people operations maintains a visible presence in her company.
I'm helping them whether they have any struggles in their day, like the normal management stuff, like one-on-ones, career growth, giving feedback, giving recognition, all of those kind of things, but also on a broader scale, helping the mobile team be recognized in Buffer, helping get us work, like chatting to the other product teams and helping them decide what to build and how to build it on mobile. So kind of being an interface there for the mobile team and the other product teams at Buffer.
And you say you help them to get recognition. What are some of the things you look out in order to do that?
Good question. A lot of things. There's the small, easy recognitions, right? In Slack, when someone just posts or shares something or asks a great question, we have something called Taco Bot in Slack where you can give someone a taco for recognition and they collect them, and there's maybe a reward at the end from like the whole Buffer team. So those are, I think, the small and tiny things which happen day in, day out. And then there's maybe on a broader scale when someone kind of embarked on a bigger project or kind of stepped out of their comfort zone. It's not a promotion, but it's something you want to give them recognition for. So we posted in our, we use something called Threads, kind of like a forum type of tool. And we have a praise section there. So we make it kind of available to the whole company and kind of sharing the praise with that person if it's on a bigger scale.
So the company is fully distributed. So this is also about giving visibility to the work as well as to the managers?
Yes.
So I think we're lucky in the sense that, as I mentioned before, we have an office in Buenos Aires, an office in San Francisco, and then many of us are remote. And the way our team was when it started, and now we're 4, but we were 3, we actually were composed of one person in the Buenos Aires office, one person in the San Francisco office, and then myself as remote. So it's almost as if we have a representative in our team of each type of worker environment. So I'll be able to relate to a lot of the challenges that the remote employees have. And I feel like I have empathy for that type of work. Whereas the visibility is definitely there as in physical presence is there. In Buenos Aires, we have a person who's physically working there. And same with San Francisco, somebody's coming to the office at least once or twice a week. Sometimes she works from home, but she is there as well. So it's just a pretty amazing way that it worked out, that we were spread out that way. And then in terms of presence, well, yeah, okay, we have that physical presence in those 2 offices, so people can directly go to those teammates that I have there. But online, we also have, so we have a Slack channel, just people ops, where it's mainly for our team to share non-confidential information around people operations. This could be resources. This is where we do our daily check-ins and things like that, and where sometimes other managers from other teams pop in and ask us questions. And then we have a Slack channel called Dear Pops, which stands for Dear People Operations. So Dear Pops is a channel where anybody can come in and make requests or suggestions that they would like the people operations team to look at or to start doing or anything like that. We have had, of course, people reach out to us privately on Slack as well. So they know we are there. We have introduced ourselves in the all hands. So we have an all hands meeting with everybody in the company coming on Zoom every 2 Fridays. And we facilitate those all hands as well. So they know us well because that's kind of our event for the whole company. I mean, it was already there previously, but now it's really okay. People operations is, we're creating the agenda. We're asking for people to come forward if they want to talk about a topic during the all hands. We have a channel dedicated to the all hands. So then we share the agenda when it's ready, and then we facilitate it. We moderate it once it starts. So they know who we are, generally speaking. But of course, we're hiring a lot of new people now. And when you have new people starting, they will not necessarily remember all the faces and all the names. We have to add some kind of induction session in our onboarding process, where we also make sure that they know who to reach to when it comes to HR related issues or culture related issues.
So we're covering quite a bit, but we're also only skimming the surface. So look out over the next few months, probably at the end of the year, for the full interviews with some of our guests. So we covered how they began to learn to lead the team, how they lead the group development and learning process, how they look after the individuals, and how they maintain visibility within the organization. Now, as well as the will to experiment, which I mentioned earlier, to lead a team, whatever kind, whatever location, whatever specific or not, you need a high level of self-awareness. But in the remote space, there is an added dimension, which is you also need to understand how being apart from others affects you. Not just apart from others in your team, but apart from others in general. So let's hear again from Tim Burgess.
People are always shaped by their own experience. And so I went through a period where I worked remotely for about 4 years, I think it was. And by the end of it, I didn't enjoy it. So at the beginning, it was great. I was really productive. And then just gradually over time, my productivity slipped. And, gradually, but eventually I started feeling bad because I wasn't being productive and my days were getting longer. And so when my second child was born, when our second child was born, I moved into a co-working space, and I really, really loved it. And so for me, that's an environment that suits me. I need the visual cues of people working around me. I like having that reminder that that's what we're doing here. It keeps me focused.
And being around other people who are working, it's got a different kind of energy.
Yeah, and they don't have to be working in my company, don't have to be working on the same things. I don't even really need to talk to them a lot. It's just, I just like being around people. And also, to be fair, I live a fair way out of the city where there's no amenities here. So if I'm working from home, like I'm at home, I can't walk down the street and grab lunch or go to a coffee shop or whatever. So it makes sense for me to go into the city where, there's good places to eat and there's people around and gym to go to and all the other stuff I like to do.
One of the realizations about myself actually is I'd always considered myself to be sort of mostly an introvert. But when I came out here and I was working initially from home by myself, I was suddenly struck by the fact that I may actually be an extrovert. And by that, I guess I mean that I just was quick to realize that I'm actually rather energized by having people around me and being together and pulling all the energy that comes with being together and pulling in the same direction. So that was, I guess for me, that was my first realization. And I resolved that for myself by joining a co-working space. And most recently, even though we do have people in other US time zones, I've sort of most recently decided that I would like to prioritize having more people who can be physically present with me in California or with the team in New Zealand. So that's a slight change that I've recently decided on. But for me, there's just a lot of energy and a lot of good things that come to the company from not all having to be together, but having these kinds of groups of people at least clustered together.
So we've got another part of culture which is heavily influenced by the founders. We just heard from Millie, who is a co-founder of her company, and her vision of how her teams can get the best work done is by working in clusters. Other companies, because their founders were more comfortable with a fully remote setup, will have decided to stay as a fully distributed company. There is no right way of doing this. Different ways will suit different individuals, different teams, different managers, different company leaders. The important thing here, and what we advocate for at Virtual Not Distant, is that we remember that it is an option. It is an option to be distributed. It is an option to be hybrid. but I'm maintaining that everyone needs to be working in the same location by default. That's what needs to be addressed. It's one option and it will suit some organizations better than others. So again, and experimentation, trying out, doing things like Millie, she became remote from her team, not because that was an aim of itself, because it suited the business for her to go over, to leave her team behind. I recently am working with an organization who have adopted remote practices, not to give the flexibility to the people. That hasn't been the main reason. The main reason was that the way in which the teams were organized, which was by location, did not suit the work. So they said, right, let's organize the teams how we think that team makeup will suit the work most. And we're distributed. Okay, let's now address that. So remote is not always a means of its own. It's not the goal to be remote, but it will enable us to work differently and how it suits us best. So anyway, I don't want to go off on one, but this is really important to remember that experimentation of location independence, whether it's clusters also or working from anywhere, etc., needs to serve the work. So let's see if I go back to my Trello. Found my place. So I'm definitely learning loads in the remote space, mainly through the conversations that, as you can hear, I'm having with all sorts of people, including my colleague, Maya Middlemiss, and of course, other guests of this podcast, some whom I actually have the privilege of talking to away from the microphone also. So I am learning from my peers and also from those with completely different visions of the world of work. So I continue to grow as a professional and, as Tim mentioned earlier, as a person. So let's hear how the people leaders that are guests in this episode today are learning from those around them in all sorts of ways. And we'll start with Tim. And just to warn you, we had a slight audio issues at the beginning of this clip. So don't try and adjust anything at your end. It's our end, but it's very short. I mean, the problem with the audio is short, not the clip.
When I first started leading people, I didn't think that you needed to give people positive reinforcement. I figured people knew what their job was, and that my role was to point out if they weren't doing their job well, but otherwise that they were good. And it's a terrible strategy. It's terrible. I'm so embarrassed to admit it, but basically what I was doing was only giving negative feedback. And then one day I came into the office and I said to somebody, I just wish things were more positive around here. And she said, well, don't you think that starts at the top? and I was like, oh. And then I thought about it, and she was so right. Like, I'm so glad that she said it. It really made me think that the approach I was taking wasn't working. And so that's one example. I think trying to talk less and listen more is something I'm working on. I'm not good at that. And something I've discovered certainly in the last couple of months is trying to be much more clear about what needs to get done and what my expectations are. So are my expectations understood, and do I understand the other person's expectations and limitations and concerns? So yeah, lots of good stuff, and barely scratching the surface. I feel like I've just started this journey.
So aside from the feedback model that I just explained, we agreed not to do that too often because it takes a long time, and I think if you do it too often, almost the feedback loses its value. So we said we would do it maybe once a quarter or something like that. But I asked directly many times for feedback in our one-on-ones or just on Slack. And I say, for example, I was on holiday, but I was supposed to take a holiday, which I was, but I was also supposed to finish hiring somebody. And unfortunately, this was kind of overlapping with my holidays. So I was still coming online during my holidays to continue the process of, finalizing this hiring process. And inevitably, when you come online, then you see all the other things that are happening. So I would just kind of poke into Asana and Slack and the emails and be like, oh, don't forget to do this, and here's this, and here's that. And then I thought, oh my goodness, I'm micromanaging my team now because I'm not just focusing on what I'm supposed to do and letting them do their own thing while I'm supposed to be on holiday. So I actually just went to my team members and I said, I'm sorry if I'm or if it feels like I'm micromanaging, please tell me, because that's not my intention. But I just, I am pretty self-aware, I believe, but I also ask my team, how did that feel when I did this thing? And I think that by asking them directly and also sharing how I felt sometimes while going through a challenge with my team, I think that opens up a more trusting relationship where they know that I can be a little bit vulnerable as well, and that I'm open to all kinds of feedback and also, criticism, but also positive feedback, of course.
And it's great role modeling, because in asking how am I doing, you're hoping to set the expectation and the norm that it's okay to ask back how you're doing also.
Yeah, but there is a fine balance. Of course, there's sometimes I think, okay, did I overshare how I'm feeling right now? And of course, a lot of people argue that women are more prone to sharing more openly, and our team at the moment is entirely composed of women. So I wonder if there's an element of that. We can look at feminine, masculine energies without looking into gender specifically. Mm-hmm. But just this kind of more feminine trait of sharing and supporting each other. And it's maybe us being more comfortable with our emotions. And I feel like in my team, definitely we are able to rant with each other if we want to. And then it's okay, thank you for listening to my rant. I'm done now. Yes. But in terms of how I'm doing as a manager, I think, I think they tell me sometimes, honestly, this is how it was for us, or no, don't worry, this wasn't a problem for us. And I feel like it's quite honest.
And finally, I am beginning to wrap up this, what could be a mammoth episode. I mean, it has taken a while to complete this. I just find it fascinating, and I just wanted to put in everything that they had said. Anyway, let's finally remember how Marcus, at the beginning of the episode, talked about how at first, when he was starting to manage people, and especially because they're not around him, he wasn't really getting the feeling that he was achieving anything, because the nature of the job meant he didn't see any tangible results at the end of the day. And also, you don't see the people where you're working with continuously around you getting the work done. So I asked him, how did he get over that?
Well, of course, I chatted a lot with my manager at that time. I also took on a coach, a leadership coach later on. So she helped me quite a bit there. And ultimately, it was just, time and patience. It's understanding that your work and the effect your work has will take a while to show, right? Getting a team closer together to collaborate more and be more efficient. You won't change something and then the next day you immediately see the result, right? It will take weeks, even months to actually see that happen. So I there's no magic trick. I think it's really just patience and understanding that as long as you don't get negative feedback, you're doing a good job. Like, that helped me. I know it's maybe a weird thing to say, but as long as you don't get any correctional warnings like, hey, you're not working or something like that, that means you're still on the right track. So even if you have a day full of video calls, as a manager, I mean, that's your job, right? To chat to people and understand what's going on. So it will take everyone who comes from a different job at the beginning a while to adjust. But yeah, just have patience and slowly adjust to it.
Well, listeners, these lovely guests had a lot to say, and as I said, I could talk to them all day. So look out at the end of the year for some full interviews. Thank you very, very much. In order of appearance, Laïla von Alvensleben from Mural, Marcus Wermuth from Buffer, Tim Burgess from Shield GEO, and Millie Blackwell from Showcase Workshop. And you can find links to their sites and Twitter streams in the show notes, which are usually in your podcast app. If you are not subscribed to us, subscribe now. Or you can head over to virtualnotdistant.com, look for episode 209, and then you will find a wonderful summary written by Maya Middlemiss, my colleague, and also pictures of our guests. If you can't find an easy way to listen to us every time we release an episode, get in touch through the contact form and I will guide you to finding the best app for you. Finally, listeners, thank you very, very much for listening. Do let us know if you enjoyed the episode, what you took from it, how it entertained you. I hope, to be completely honest, I hope this helps you in some way, but mainly let's at least entertain you for a little bit. And also whether you enjoyed our company. And any remote related topics you would like us to look into for you, let us know. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.